All rise. Superior Court of California, County of San Diego, Department 333 is now in session. The Honorable Michael Grosh is presiding.
Thank you very much. Please remain seated and come to order. Looking forward to this evening's court proceedings. I know that all of you have been working very, very hard in preparation for tonight's event. And it's always a thrill for me to get to see future lawyers. Often I see talent that surpasses what I see in the courtroom during the daytime. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing everything that you guys have worked so hard to prepare tonight. I want you to relax as best you can. I know that everybody here is supporting each one of you. We want to see you succeed and do your best. And just as best you can, try to relax and enjoy the experience. I'm going to have introductions in just a moment, but just a few reminders that no backgrounds, so that eats up the bandwidth, and we need to have all the bandwidth we can. You've got to complete your presentation within the time limits. The clerk will signal you as your time for each section of the presentation begins to run out. When your total time for each section runs out, you will be stopped, even if you have not finished. And of course, each attorney must call 4 witnesses within that time limit. Remember, this is a bench trial, and at the end of the trial, I will render a verdict of guilty or not guilty in relation to the charges brought. The teams will be rated on the quality of the presentation independent of my verdict. My verdict does not impact your score that you will receive. Of course, no recesses will be called, so I hope everybody prepared accordingly. If for any reason there's a brief delay or interruption due to technical issues, team members should remain in their appropriate places and should have no contact with spectators or coaches. Remember that objections are limited to California mock trial simplified rules of evidence in your case packet. And then in order to help myself and the attorney's scores, let me start with the prosecution team. Would you please do introductions stating your name and your role?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Joseph Salfani. I am the lead trial attorney for the people.
Good evening.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Jackson Norris for the people.
Good evening.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Eric Engelman for the people.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Luis Lavat for the people.
Good evening to you.
Your Honor, at this moment, may our witnesses please introduce themselves?
Yes, please.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Griffin Capiello, and tonight I am Remi Montoya.
Thank you.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Billy Bias, and tonight I'm Drew Marshak.
Thank you. Has that exhausted the people's witnesses?
No, Your Honor, we have 2 more.
That's what I thought.
Sorry. Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Elliot Ramaya, and I'm Officer Max Bird.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Jake Bertolotti, and I'm playing Dr. Kai Chavez. At this time, may the clerk introduce himself?
Yes, please.
Good evening, Your Honor. I'm Graham Moreland Tellez, and I will be your clerk tonight.
Thank you for your assistance.
May our attorney... Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. May our attorney coaches and teacher coach please introduce themselves?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Your Honor. Alexis Pomish, attorney coach for the people.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, Your Honor. Christy Gill, attorney coach.
Thank you. Good evening.
Evening, Your Honor. Kevin Manley, teacher coach.
Thank you. Good evening to each of you, and thank you for your assistance. Does that conclude the people's introductions?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you very much. Nice to meet each one of you. Let me turn to the defense, and I would like to have you introduce yourselves, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Your Honor. Benjamin Feng, defense pretrial attorney for my client, Lee Croddy.
Thank you.
Good evening, Your Honor. Albert Jen, defense attorney for my client, Lee Croddy.
Good evening.
Good evening, Your Honor. Darren Chan, defense attorney for my client, Lee Croddy.
Good evening.
Good evening, Your Honor. Dylan Thomas, defense attorney for my client, Lee Croddy. At this time, may our witnesses introduce themselves?
Yes, please.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Kaolyn Roberts, and I am Lee Croddy.
Thank you.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Nolan Ezzet, and I am Erin Sullivan.
Good evening.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Logan Levy, and I am Zuri O'Neill.
Good evening.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Ashley Pham, and I am Dr. Jess Bayard. At this time, may our bailiff please introduce himself?
Yes, please.
My name is Nikolas Renner, and I will serve as your courtroom's bailiff for today's proceedings. At this time, may our unofficial timekeeper please introduce themselves?
Yes, thank you.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Cole Frost, and I'll be serving as your unofficial timekeeper for today's proceedings. At this time, may our attorney coaches and teacher advisor please introduce themselves?
Yes, please.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Jack Milner, teacher coach.
Good evening.
Good evening, Your Honor. Brandon Saxon, attorney coach.
Thank you. Good evening to you.
Good evening, Your Honor. Robert Trestman, attorney coach for the defense.
Thank you to each one of you for volunteering your time, and good evening. Is there anyone I've not yet met that hasn't introduced themselves? All right. Are there any questions before we begin pretrial arguments? In that case, let's go ahead and call the hearing to order. Remember, both sides have 4 minutes to present your arguments. Each side will be offered 2 minutes of rebuttal time. And remember that rebuttal is used to counter your opponent's arguments. It cannot be used to raise new issues. Is counsel for the defense ready to begin?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Then when you're ready.
Good evening, Your Honor. Under arrest or during interrogation, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. Anything you say can be used against yourself. For decades, as a product of the 1966 Supreme Court ruling, it is standard procedure for police to give Miranda warnings. That is, to inform a person who is being arrested or being interrogated of their fundamental Fifth Amendment rights. This restatement of existing rights has been, is now, and will continue to be a crucial element in the arrest and interrogation process in the name of protecting our citizens and our constituents.
But do police officers always have to give the advisal of the constitutional rights to an arrestee?
Your Honor, if a person is being arrested or interrogated and they're in custodial interrogation, then they must give the Miranda warnings.
Okay, thank you.
May I continue, Your Honor?
Please.
Thank you. Unfortunately, when it comes to today's case, even though a clear custodial interrogation was in process, Miranda warnings were completely absent. The factual contextualization is as follows. On the day of Remi's arrest, Officer Bird drove Lee Croddy to the police station for questions. And on the way there, Officer Bird asked, "You're the RCN person, right? The anarchist YouTuber?" Lee responded defensively. The police radio in the front seat rang with a call that interrupted the conversation, and the two traded remarks back and forth before Lee Croddy ended with, "I'd like to speak to my attorney."
Can I ask you a question about that ride, though? Most of the cases that I'm familiar with involve, when we're looking at custodial interrogations, they looked at people in police cars with cages and lights and sirens, and that would suggest to many people custody. What was the situation here? Would you say that was similar or different?
Of course, Your Honor. The defense believes it is, in fact, very similar for 3 key reasons. First of all, Lee Croddy was isolated in the back seat of the police vehicle. Second of all, an official police officer was driving Lee. And of course, third of all, there was an official police radio, which was in clear line of sight, that received a call in the middle of the conversation, as stated before. So this asserts that Lee saw, heard, and acknowledged the existence of this police radio.
So the fact that the car driven by the police officer was not marked and the police officer was not in a uniform, does that affect the analysis at all that I should use?
While it is true that the police vehicle was unmarked and the officer was in plain clothes, the 3 facts stated before, and most especially the fact that the police radio was serving as a constant reminder to Lee Croddy that he was in this custody state, he was in an official police environment. It served as a constant reminder that this was a custodial interrogation.
Thank you. Please continue.
Your Honor, may I continue?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Throughout their lengthy interaction, 0 Miranda warnings were given. Now, with the facts of today's case in mind, Your Honor, The defense moves to have Lee Croddy statements excluded from evidence due to them being obtained through an unlawful custodial interrogation that lacked Miranda warnings. Now, this is true for two reasons. First, as stated before, the environment, or more specifically, the police vehicle Lee Croddy was in, was a coercive environment. The three reasons given before still stand. Lee was isolated in the back seat, Lee was being driven by an official police officer, and Lee was aware of an official police radio that rang in the middle of his conversation.
But, pardon the interruption, but didn't your client initiate the conversation with the police officer as opposed to the police officer initiating questioning? And doesn't that have some impact according to the cases that I should think about?
Your Honor, the conversation between Lee Croddy and Officer Byrd was the one who made the first statement. It was actually Officer Byrd who first asked, "You're the RCN person, right? The anarchist YouTuber." Therefore, it is the officer who is initiating the conversation, which is why this was an interrogation.
Thank you.
And may I continue, Your Honor?
Please.
Thank you. Now, People v. Boyer explains how a coercive environment creates reasonably calculated attempts to elicit an incriminating response, otherwise known as custodial interrogation. That ruling is a direct parallel to today's case due to the striking resemblances. Both Croddy and Boyer's participation was voluntary, and both found themselves in a coercive environment. Exactly why the Supreme Court of California considered the event custodial interrogation. Whether the interrogation was in a police car or a police station, both are very clearly coercive environments run by the police.
If I understand your argument, then, I'm sorry, did I hear time or no?
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay, thank you. So if I understand your argument, then anytime somebody is in a police car, they're in a custodial environment and Miranda would apply, even if it's an unmarked police car and an officer out of uniform. Is there case law that supports that per se rule, that a police car is a coercive environment just by its nature?
Your Honor, we do not believe that a police car is a coercive environment just by its nature. But our argument is that the reminder of being in a police car, of being in an environment that is used and run by the police, is a coercive environment. In this case specifically, that means the police radio, which again served as a constant reminder to Lee Croddy, proves that this was a coercive environment.
I see. Thank you. Go ahead and continue.
Thank you. Second, Officer Byrd was attempting throughout the entire conversation to elicit an incriminating response from Lee Croddy. Now, Rhode Island v. Innis defines an interrogation as any conversation with the intent to elicit an incriminating response, which Lee and Byrd's interaction was. The magic number here, Your Honor, is 2. There were 2 instances within the conversation where Officer Byrd made Lee have to respond defensively. Lee Croddy defended herself twice against the accusations of being an anarchist. Furthering the elicitation of incriminating evidence by Officer Byrd, Lee Croddy was reasonably suspicious enough to have asked for her attorney twice. 2 occasions of defensive response to accusations, 2 occasions of questions that prompted Lee to ask for her attorney. At the end of the day, Your Honor, all interpretations of case law lead to the exact same conclusion. Lee Croddy has had her Fifth Amendment rights grossly violated. As such, the defense moves for a suppression of any and all evidence obtained through the unlawful custodial interrogation that lacked Miranda warnings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, counsel. I appreciate the argument. Is counsel for the people ready to summarize their arguments?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Please proceed when you're ready.
Your Honor, on behalf of the people of the state of California, we respectfully request that you deny the defense motion for 2 main reasons. First, the defendant was not in custody at the time of the conversation. Second, the defendant was not interrogated. Since Officer Byrd asked the defendant to accompany him to the station, the defendant could have rejected going into the unmarked vehicle. A rational person would probably ask on what basis they are going to be transported and if they are under arrest in response to this situation. This indicates that the defendant was never in a custodial setting. And Officer,
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. As I understood the facts, the officer just offered a ride to the defendant, and the defendant accepted. I didn't hear anything in the evidence that was presented in support of the motion about the officer insisting that the defendant come with the officer. I didn't see anything about a gun or, a command voice. Wouldn't those things be necessary in order for me to conclude that this was more of a command to come with the officer than, hey, I'm going down to the station, I want to talk to you?
Can you clarify?
Sure. If Lee getting into the officer's car was a directive of the police officers, as opposed to something voluntary, wouldn't we expect to see, some kind of show of force? So your argument, as I understand it, is that this was a voluntary getting in the car, correct? Or that it was.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Please continue.
Okay. Officer Byrd clearly stated that there would be questioning once they arrived at the station. Here, Officer Byrd established that the defendant was not in custody and that the interrogation would be at the station. As for whether the conversation in the vehicle was an interrogation, Officer Byrd was clearing an apparent confusion, was not aggressive in any manner, and was not on the offensive in this conversation. His remark was a human response to finding someone that he might ponder if they have seen that person on some television show or movie before. Although Officer Byrd addressed the defendant's character in the conversation, Officer Byrd was carefully applying his moral values with the thought of his fellow countrymen's safety in mind. Officer Byrd established that the intention of the conversation was to be general and not to be specific to the case with Remi. Therefore, Officer Byrd made it clear to the defendant that the conversation was not an interrogation, but a casual conversation.
Can I ask you
And people
about that?
Go for Your Honor.
Thank you. As I understood the evidence, the Officer Byrd asked Lee, are you that RCN person, the anarchist on YouTube? Isn't anarchist a pretty accusatory term that doesn't ring like a casual conversation to me? What do you think?
Well, maybe he had heard from other people using that term and referred it to try to make the connection.
Okay, thank you.
I wouldn't know since I wasn't in the officer's shoes.
I understand that. Please continue.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor.
Sure.
Okay. So Officer Byrd established that the intention of the conversation was to be specific and not to be general and not to be specific. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
So therefore, in People v. Andreasen, it was held that a casual conversation is permissible even if the defendant were in custody. And in this case, the defendant wasn't even in custody.
What should I take of the fact that Lee asked the officer, do I need a lawyer? Is that indicative of a casual conversation, or is that indicative of somebody who feels like they're being accused of a crime?
So in that remark, in that he said, do I need a lawyer? It is apparent that the defendant was being irrational because Officer Byrd was never aggressive in any manner. And the defendant asked, he said, can I have a lawyer, or do I need to call a lawyer? Asking a question, not making a statement.
I see your argument. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Please.
Even though Officer Byrd repeatedly made it clear that he was not interrogating the defendant acted irrationally. When the defendant asked if he needed to call his lawyer, Officer Byrd refused to answer his question and tried to further clarify that the defendant was not in a custodial setting and the defendant was not being interrogated. Regardless of what the defendant said, he did not need his Miranda rights to be read because it was repeatedly made clear by Officer Byrd that the defendant was not in a custodial interrogation through indications. In People v. Torres, it was held that a statement volunteered by a defendant that is not being interrogated does not require Miranda warning and is therefore admissible. The case applies to this instance, especially because the defendant repeatedly indicated that he was not being interrogated. The conversation should remain admissible to trial. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your argument. I appreciate that. Let me inquire of the defense if you have a rebuttal to the argument that people have made.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, when you're ready.
Opposing counsel claims that Lee voluntarily allowed herself to go into the police vehicle, yet as stated before in People v. Boyer, the defendant also voluntarily went to the police station for questions. The fact that Lee Croddy still felt themselves not free to leave at the point due to being in the back seat and the existence of the police radio proves that the environment, like People v. Boyer, was coercive. Opposing counsel next claims that Byrd wasn't attempting to elicit an incriminating response, but this is simply not true. As the court has pointed out, Byrd accused Lee of being an anarchist, someone who by definition is skeptical of authority, which directly ties Lee Croddy to Remi Montoya's crime of assaulting and robbing a government official. It is clear that since the very start, Byrd was attempting to elicit an incriminating response with his accusation. Opposing counsel then brings up People v. Andreessen, but in that case, the police were aware of the anger and delusional demeanor of Andreessen, so they took preventative measures to prevent that aggression, which was a casual conversation that went towards that goal. That's why the statements were not considered custodial interrogation. Your Honor, the distinguishing factor between Croddy and Andreessen is clear. With zero signs of aggression from Croddy, Officer Byrd initiated the conversation by himself with zero intention of preventing aggression that never existed.
Does it have to be an attempt to prevent aggression in order for it to be a casual conversation?
Your Honor, the defense believes that specifically in People v. Andreessen, the intent of the conversation was to prevent aggression. That is why it was not considered an interrogation, as per Rhode Island v. Innis. But in the case of People v. Croddy, as shown by the fact that there was no aggression, and as shown by the fact that Lee was prompting and baiting Croddy, accusing her of being an anarchist, the only intention of the conversation was to elicit an incriminating response. And therefore, under Rhode Island v. Innis, it would be considered an interrogation.
I see.
Your Honor, may I continue?
Please.
Opposing counsel next attempts to bring up People v. Torres, but that case is very different from the case at hand. Torres did not speak English as a first language and made the incriminating statement while waiting for a Miranda warning with no conversation with the sergeant, and is therefore very different from the case at hand in which Lee Croddy not only spoke English as a first language, but also made the incriminating statement after being prompted to by Officer Byrd in conversation after multiple accusations. As such, the defense moves for a suppression of any and all evidence obtained through the unlawful custodial interrogation that lacked Miranda warnings. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. I appreciate your responding to the people's argument. And people, would you like to rebut any of the defense argument?
Yes, Your Honor. The opposing counsel stated the police radio as an indicator that the defendant was in a coercive environment. Well, that would be true for an irrational person. For a rational person, seeing a police radio in an unmarked vehicle would probably be most logical, because an officer, even when he's not on duty, needs to be alert of any situation that could come at any instance. So the police radio is therefore not an indicator that the defendant was in a hostile environment or a coercive environment. Also, the opposing counsel stated that the defendant was not aggressive in any manner but he abruptly interrupted Officer Byrd one or two times during his conversation, which indicates that the defendant was in fact being aggressive and abrupt. Thank you.
feel that distinguishes it from the case cited by your opposing counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
That's an important fact to consider. Thank you. Go ahead and continue.
I think that's it.
Okay.
Your Honor.
Thank you. No, rebuttal is just to rebut the points of the other attorney, and you have rebutted those, so thank you. The people rest their rebuttal. Let me ask at this time, before I rule on the motion, I know the students have 60 seconds to confer with their teacher coach, so I'll give you that time now. Please let me know when you're done.
Your Honor, there are no issues from the defense.
Oh, thank you, people.
Your Honor, there are no issues from the prosecution.
All right. Thank you both. First of all, very well argued. I appreciated your comparing and contrasting the facts of the case before us with cases that have come from higher courts and applied the facts to the case. You both have argued extremely effectively. But in terms of ruling on the motion, I am compelled to the conclusion that there was no custody in this matter and no interrogation. So without a custodial interrogation, Miranda warnings were not required. Therefore, their defense motion to suppress is denied. All right, thank you. Then, again, well argued, and I appreciate that. We will go ahead then and move to the trial, now having completed the pretrial motion. People of the state of California are charging the defendant, Lee Croddy, with 2 counts, aiding and abetting first-degree burglary committed by Remi Montoya, and also count 2, accessory after the fact to a felony committed by Remi Montoya. And we'll begin the trial with opening statements. Prosecution, are you ready to present the opening?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. When you're ready.
She would do anything to gain more clicks. She doesn't care about the people she's spreading lies to, because she only spreads these wild lies in order to further her own monetary gain. She has incited violence through her manipulation. She is Lee Croddy. Lee Croddy values her own content over giving people reliable and correct information. Granted, one person with a camera and a YouTube channel might seem relatively small, but Lee Croddy reaches over 3 million viewers. Lee Croddy has sacrificed her own credibility and the sanctity of the relationship between the news and the people in order to make a quick buck. It may be strange to hear a YouTube channel called news, but that can be how people get their news today in today's modern world. Lee Croddy has gone so far as to name herself the right choice of news, creating the false narrative that she will provide the truth and reliable information. Throughout this trial, you will hear that this is not the case. A person creating an uproar on the internet is not a crime in itself, though. Lee has decided to utilize her online presence, though, to manipulate her fans in order to commit crimes weaponizing these extremist ideas. Testimony will show that a person like Lee, who cares little about the truth and who has created a dangerous environment full of conspiracy, sounds like the perfect recipe for violence and for good content. Lee Croddy has created this toxic recipe in order to further her own goal of content at any cost. Lee Croddy is charged with aiding and abetting first-degree burglary and accessory after the fact to a felony. In order for Lee Croddy to be convicted of the first charge, we, as the people, must prove that Lee Croddy took a direct but ineffective step towards assisting the burglary and that they intended to commit the crime. Even if she didn't step foot inside the house, the evidence will show that she did assist Remi Montoya to do just that. Count 2 requires us to prove that Lee was an accessory after the fact, and this will be accomplished through our witness testimony. Now, let's get into the chain of events that brought us here. Lee Croddy has had multiple interactions with her fans in an effort to further her own brand, including meet and greets and her online presence on websites such as Twitter and YouTube. One of these fans is named Remi Montoya. The evidence will show that Remi Montoya was manipulated by Lee to steal and commit a crime in order for Lee to be able to tell the truth for more content. We will hear his personal testimony tonight and what his opinion on Lee Croddy is. After Lee manipulated Remi Montoya into stealing for her, Lee thought that she had committed the perfect crime because she had gotten more content, and she thought that her hands were clean. Lee, in fact, did not commit the perfect crime, as Lee directly told her loyal followers, including Remi, to commit a crime and supplied them with all the information necessary to commit said crime. The victim of this crime is named Drew Marshak, and we will hear what his thoughts are on what happened with Mr. Montoya tonight. After Lee was shown Drew Marshak's stolen briefcase via Remi Montoya, Lee drove Remi home, and in order to keep her content safe. Remi then spent the night at Lee's house, and an officer came and arrested Remi and Lee the next morning. The man who arrested them is named Officer Max Bird, and we will share his involvement in this case. This case will be sealed tonight by our expert in mental health and illness, Dr. Chavez, who will provide his experience with over 150 cases that are similar to this one under his belt. The people's evidence will point towards only one conclusion: guilty. Your Honor, the evidence will prove Lee Croddy's guilt, and the people would like to ask that you find the defendant guilty on both counts based off the evidence that will be presented in trial tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Defense, would you care to present your opening statement now?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. When you're ready.
In computer science, conditional statements are a cornerstone of any programming language. A conditional statement, also known as an if-then statement, follows a simple logical formula. If certain conditions are true, then we can expect a given outcome. However, this logical reasoning is broken when an outcome is unexpected or unpredicted, given the defined conditions. In today's case, the defense will examine two conditional statements that will introduce vast amounts of reasonable doubt. In the first of these statements, logic was thoroughly followed, yet in the second, logical reasoning was grossly ignored. Let's examine the first conditional statement, beginning with the if conditions. My client, social media influencer Lee Croddy, will testify today to her close relationship with all her fans. Erin Sullivan, Ms. Croddy's agent, will also explain that Ms. Croddy goes above and beyond for both old and new fans of her YouTube channel. At the February 15th meet and greet, Ms. Croddy and Erin Sullivan, and also Zuri O'Neill, another fan of Lee's, they will all testify that they noticed the nervous behavior of one fan in particular, Remi Montoya. Each of these three witnesses will detail Remi's nervous behavior, including visible panic, incoherent speech, and anxious pacing. Given these if conditions, my client's reaction, the then statement, was only logical. Lee Croddy offered to help. She invited Remi to her home to provide him with a safe space for the night. On the other hand, let's look at the second conditional statement, beginning again with the if conditions. On February 14th, my client sent a direct message asking Remi Montoya to get documents from a certain Drew Marshak. As she would testify today, Ms. Croddy simply meant for Remi to ask Mr. Marshak for these documents. Our examination of Exhibit C, a screenshot of this very text conversation, will reveal that in no way did we direct, advise, or implicate that Remi should break into the house and steal the documents. In fact, Lee even said, "Don't do anything I would not do," a warning that clearly admonishes against extreme action. In the context of these conditions, Remi's actions were impulsive and unexpected, he took it upon himself to illegally assault and burglarize Mr. Marshak, a clear violation of any logic or reasoning. These leaps and bounds in Remi's reasoning will be supported by Dr. Jess Bayart, who found in her analysis that Remi is not a typical fan. Instead, he is the type of fan who will act independently of an influencer like Lee. Your Honor, the prosecution has the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt on account of 2 charges, aiding and abetting and accessory after the fact. Today, myself and my co-counsel, Albert Jen and Dylan Thomas, will show that the conditions for these charges as dictated by CalCrim 401 and 440 will not be met. You will see today that Ms. Croddy did not use any language to facilitate illegal action, and having no knowledge that a burglary had even occurred, simply decided to help a panicking fan in a way she could. The prosecution will not be able to overcome their burden of proof because at the end of the trial, Your Honor, you will be left with a lot of ifs, a lot of questions, a lot of reasonable doubt. At the end of today's proceedings, the defense respectfully requests for a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate both counsel's opening statements. That's very helpful to the court. All right, prosecution, please call your first witness.
The prosecution would like to call Remi Montoya to the stand.
Calling Remi Montoya to the stand. Please state your first and last name and spell your last name for the court.
Griffin Cappiello, Cappiello.
Please state your first and last name and spell your last name for the court.
Hello?
This is Remi Montoya, correct?
Yes, hello.
Please state your first and last name and spell your last name for the court.
Okay, Remi Montoya, R-E-M-I, Remi Montoya, M-O-N-T-O-Y-A.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
For the judge's convenience, testimony for this witness can be found on pages 25 to 28 on the case packet.
Thank you.
May I begin, Your Honor?
People, when you're ready.
Good evening, Mr. Montoya. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Remi Montoya. I am 21 years old. I'm a student right here at the Beacon Hills Community College, and I'm a sales associate with the Thinker Toys Corporation. I've worked there for the past couple of years now, and I really enjoy my position there.
Before we get further into this case, Mr. Montoya, let's address the elephant in the room. Is it correct that you were charged with first-degree burglary?
That is correct.
Did you argue these charges at all?
No, I did not. In fact, I pleaded guilty to these charges.
Are you familiar with who Lee Croddy is?
Of course, I'm a Lee super fan. Once a couple years ago, I was doing some research on the Roswell, New Mexico UFO crash, and I stumbled across one of her videos, and I've been hooked ever since. I've watched her videos all the time.
Do you see her here tonight?
Yes, she's right there on my screen in the box marked Lee Croddy.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness has correctly identified the defendant.
The record may so reflect.
Moving on, Mr. Montoya, what is your relation, or how is your relation with Lee Croddy changed?
Well, I used to be very close with Lee. We exchanged texts and direct messages across various social media platforms, but recently it's become a little strained. Lee told me to go get some documents from the house of a federal agent.
Could you give us some background on why Lee wanted you to get something from a federal agent's home?
Definitely. Lee was going to be releasing a YouTube video about the secrets that the government is keeping us and how they're lying to us. And he needed these documents to help further his research. So he told me to go get them.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Objections overruled.
Do you have any other contact with Lee superfans?
Yes, I do. We have a group chat of some of the other Lee superfans that we talk and have discussions on.
Who leads these discussions normally?
Generally, that would be Lee, considering it's his content that we're talking about.
Did anything notable happen on February 14th, Mr. Montoya?
Objection,
yeah.
Your Honor. This question is leading on suggestive insinuation.
Objection, leading is overruled.
Same question.
Yes, on the 14th, Lee directly texted me on the WhatsApp platform, and he told me to go get these documents from the federal agent Marshak's house.
Mr. Montoya, I'd like to present Exhibit C to you. Do you have it in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Do you know what this is?
Yes, this is a conversation, like I said, between me and Lee.
What is it? Could you give a little bit more detail, please?
Like I said, it's on the 14th. It's a conversation between myself and Lee, or in which Lee is telling me to go get the documents from the agent Marshak's house.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of your conversations with Lee Croddy?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I request that Exhibit C be moved in evidence for the People's Exhibit, and I would also like the record to reflect that the witness has correctly identified the exhibit.
Any objection by the defense?
None, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. The exhibit's received and marked.
Mr. Montoya, in this exhibit, you mentioned you still have the address. Whose address are you speaking of?
The agent Marshak's. A couple of days previous, I mentioned we had a Lee's superfan group chat. Lee sent out the address of Marshak's house to that group chat.
How did you interpret what Lee said in this message?
Well, I think Lee's demand was pretty explicit. You need to get into that house tomorrow. We really need those documents. I took it as Lee was very desperate.
Could you read lines 31 and 32 for us, please?
Yes, you need to get into that house tomorrow. Like I said, it seems pretty desperate to me.
Moving on, Mr. Montoya, what did you do after this?
Well, the next day, I went down to Marshak's house. I saw he had left his gate open, so I entered his home through a window, and I saw that he had a laptop sitting on his counter.
What did you do after this?
Well, I took out the little USB drive I brought with me and I plugged it into the computer. I started downloading some of the files that were on the computer. And I looked at the table next to me, the counter next to me, and I saw that Marshak had left his briefcase there. So I grabbed that as well.
What did you do after this?
Well, I grabbed my USB in the briefcase and I turned around to leave and I saw Marshak standing behind me. So I punched him and I ran away.
Where did you go?
Well, I knew Lee was having a meet and greet at a nearby cafe on the same day, so I went there because I knew Lee would be able to help me.
And you still had the briefcase with you?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
Sustained.
Move to strike the testimony that was in response to the leading question.
I don't believe there was
Didn't say anything.
Answer. So with the objection sustained, you can rephrase or ask your next question.
Did you take anything from the house with you to the meet and greet?
Yes, I still had the briefcase and the USB with me.
Mr. Montoya, I'd like to present Exhibit A to you. Do you know what this is?
Yes, this is Marshak's briefcase.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of Mr. Marshak's briefcase?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I'd like to request that Exhibit A be moved into evidence as the People's Exhibit A, and also like the record to reflect that the witness has correctly identified the exhibit.
Any objection by the defense?
No objections, Your Honor.
Thank you. The exhibit's received.
Did you make? Do you observe anything in on the briefcase, Mr. Montoya?
Yes, it looks like Marshak's initial, his first initial and his last name are on there, along with a very large seal that says the Office of the Attorney General on it.
Did you make any effort to hide the seal?
No, I did not. It's a very large seal. It'd be rather difficult to try to conceal.
Moving on, Mr. Montoya, where did you go after the meet and greet?
Well, after the meet and greet, Lee offered me a ride. I got in his car and he drove me to his home where he let me spend the night.
Did anything happen the next day?
Yes, the next day I was arrested and Lee did not do anything to help me.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right, thank you. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. Montoya.
Me.
You pleaded guilty to first-degree assaults and burglary, correct?
Yes, that is
Objection,
correct.
Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Overruled.
Mr. Montoya, did you get an adequate chance to answer my question?
Yes, I said that is correct.
And isn't it also true that you will be sentenced after this trial is over?
I believe that is also correct.
Lee's statement of encouragement to obtain answers was addressed to her entire YouTube channel fan base, correct?
Initially, that is correct, but afterwards, Lee
Mr.
very.
Montoya, this question just requires a yes or no answer.
I think that Lee explicitly asked me in specific detail afterwards, after the.
Mr. Montoya, this question is about Lee's statement of encouragement to obtain answers. That was addressed to her entire YouTube channel fan base, correct?
That is correct.
And you took it upon yourself to assume that Lee was directly calling only upon your group chat members, correct?
No, that is not correct. Lee told our group chat that yes, we needed to get answers. Again, later in his her video, he again called for us to request answers, and then again the next day he explicitly.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Directing your attention to page 26, lines 20 through 22 of the updated case packet. Is this your witness statement?
Yes, it is.
Please read lines 20 through 22 of page 26 out loud for the court.
I'm sorry, which lines?
That'll be page 26, lines 20 through 22.
Okay, give me a second. Let me see. I don't believe I have the most accurate version. I don't have page 26 is not my witness statement.
No worries. I'll read for you from the updated case packet. I assumed this was a more general call to action to most viewers, but a direct call to action for us group chat members. You testified moments ago that you did not assume that Lee was directly calling upon your group chat members, yet your witness statement says otherwise. Were you telling the truth then, or are you telling the truth now?
I apologize. I misinterpreted your question. I thought that you were specifically talking about the group chat, the request in the group chat.
While watching the video that included Marshak's address, you took the time to press pause on the video. Isn't that right?
That is correct. I always pause Lee's videos to like and comment.
And after you decided to press pause and interrupt the video, you took time to write down Marshak's address, correct?
That is correct. However, Lee had also.
Mr. Montoya, this question requires just a simple yes or no question, yes or no answer.
Well, Lee sent us the address previously, but yes, I did make sure that I had the correct address written down.
And after you punched Marshak in the face, you were panicking, correct?
That is correct.
And when you talked to Lee on February 15th, you were talking extremely fast, correct?
Yes, sometimes I talk.
Mr. Montoya, that's not what I asked. When you talked to Lee on February 15th, you were talking extremely fast, correct?
I think extremely is a subjective term, but I would say I was talking slightly quickly.
And in your opinion, Lee looked genuinely concerned for you, correct?
Well, yes, like I said, Lee and I have had
Mr. Montoya, this question requires a simple yes or no answer. You were still in a state of anxiety after the event, correct?
Yes, anxiety, confusion. I was very flustered.
Mm-hmm. And in the midst of your anxiety, Lee offered you a ride, correct?
That is correct. He offered me a ride to his home.
You confirmed the briefcase was not a prop to Lee only after you got into her car, correct?
That would be correct. After Lee asked if it was a prop, I did confirm that it was not a prop.
Drained and exhausted, you pleaded with Lee to hide at her place, correct?
I think that's a bit subjective. I don't think I said to hide, but I did ask to spend the night.
Is that a yes, Mr. Montoya? You pleaded with Lee to hide at her place?
I did not plead. I just merely requested to spend the night so I could recover.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Directing the court's attention to page 28, lines 9 through 10, of the updated case packet. I'll read it out loud to you.
Thank you.
I pleaded with Lee that I just needed a place to lay low for a while. Were you telling the truth in your witness statement or in today's trial?
Again, everything that happened that day, I was very flustered. I was very confused and overwhelmed with everything. So I may have over-exaggerated what actually happened.
Mr. Montoya, or Your Honor, may I approach the witness once more?
Go ahead.
Mr. Montoya, do you have what has been previously marked as Exhibit C available with you?
Yes, I do. It's right here.
And Mr. Montoya, is this a fair and accurate representation of that text conversation?
Yes, we already.
Mr. Montoya, would you mind reading the very last text sent by Croddy?
Thank you. Good luck tomorrow. Don't do anything I would not do.
Croddy never told you to assault Drew Marshak, correct?
That would be correct. However, Lee
And
did tell me to
Mr.
get
Montoya, isn't it also true that Croddy never said to steal the documents?
Lee said, I need you to take these documents. We need these documents.
Mr. Montoya, my question was asking, isn't it also true that Croddy never said to steal the documents?
Miss Croddy's words were not directly steal. She said take.
Lastly, Mr. Montoya, Lee never said to break into the house, correct?
That is also correct.
Thank you, Mr. Montoya. That will be all, Your Honor.
Thank you. Prosecution, would you like to redirect?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Can I make a statement, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
Please be prepared with all materials necessary for trial to be respectful for Your Honor.
Thank you. All right, let's hear the people's next witness if you'd like to call your next.
Yes, Your Honor. The people would like to call our next witness, Drew Marshak.
Calling Drew Marshak to the stand. Please state your first and last name and spell your last name for the court.
Drew Marshak, Marshak.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
For the judge's convenience, testimony for this witness can be found on pages 29 to 30 on the updated case packet.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I begin?
Please.
Good evening, Drew Marshak. What is your occupation?
I've been an investigator at the Bureau of Investigation for 15 years.
And as an investigator, what do you do for a living?
I've been trained to interview suspects and understand the nature of perpetrators, as well as in sensing their feelings.
What is the nature of your job?
I would rather not share. It's very confidential and secretive.
Would you ever hand over classified information if someone were to ask or demand for it?
Definitely not. It's secret information and the public shouldn't have access to it.
Drew Marshak, what is your involvement in this case?
On February 15th, I was attacked and had some confidential information stolen from me.
Mr. Marshak, do you have what in front of you what has been marked as Exhibit A?
Yes.
Do you know what it is?
It is my briefcase that was stolen on February 15th.
How do you know what it is?
It has my name at the top right and the Department of Justice insignia in the middle.
Does it fairly and accurately depict what you know it to be?
Yes.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness has correctly identified what has been marked as Exhibit A?
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. The record may reflect the witness has identified Exhibit A.
Mr. Marshak, was the person who took your briefcase ever prosecuted and named?
Yes, he was identified as Remi Montoya.
What happened on that day?
When I got home, I saw him, but before I could even make any attempt to protect myself, he hit me in the head and I fell down. And then he stood over me and took off with my briefcase.
On the day of the event, how was Remi's complexion and state of mind?
It was apparent, really, that he was shaking and getting nervous.
Hold on one second, Mr. Marshak. I'm sorry, the objection from the defense?
This question calls for speculation as to Remi's state of mind.
Objection's overruled. I'll allow it.
Thank you. Mr. Marshak, you may continue.
He was shaking, panicking, and nervous. It was clear that that was the case, and he was muttering under his breath. He even said someone named Elite was not going to like this.
What else, if anything, did Remi say?
He was talking about a revolution, and he even turned to me and apologized that he did it for the people.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Objection's overruled.
How do you feel after the incident?
I'm livid, really. It's my worst nightmare that came true.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Cross-examination by the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. Marshak. Let's talk about the incident on February 15th. You saw an intruder in your home who was later identified as Remi Montoya, correct?
Correct.
And when you tried to stop Remi, you were punched in the face, is that right?
Yes.
And you hit your forehead on the edge of a table, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, Mr. Marshak, you were hit pretty hard, right?
Yes.
But you noticed Remi's panicked attitude even through the pain of your injury?
Yes, we've been trained to as investigators.
And as you testified earlier, you noticed Remi muttering to herself and cursing, correct?
Yes.
Remi said, "What have I done and what am I doing?" Is that correct?
Yes.
And isn't it true that immediately after she said, "Lee is not going to like this"?
Correct.
Now, I want to draw your attention to something that you testified on direct. You said that your job includes accurately perceiving feelings of people. Is that correct?
Correct.
Mr. Marshak, do you remember making a witness statement?
Yes, I do.
I'm now going to direct the court's attention to page 29, lines 3, page 29, line 3 of the updated case packet. If you do not have the updated case packet, I can read this testimony for you, Mr. Marshak.
Yeah, could you please read it?
It says, "I am Drew Marshak. I am 42 years old and have been an investigator with the California State Department of Justice's Bureau of Investigation for over 15 years. Much of my work involves confidential matters. Therefore, I cannot disclose much information, but in general, it involves the collection and analysis of usually time-sensitive material." Now, Mr. Marshak, isn't it correct that nowhere in your witness statement you didn't describe your job as being able to accurately perceive and characterize and recognize what people are thinking, correct?
Correct.
So would you admit that in your direct, your job might not be focused solely on characterizing people's feelings?
Not solely, but it's part of my job.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Any redirect by the people?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Marshak, isn't it a reasonable assumption that as an investigator, part of your position and training is that you can accurately determine a victim's state of mind?
Yeah, that's
Your
reasonable.
Honor, this is a leading question.
Objection sustained. You can rephrase.
Mr. Marshak, is it a reasonable assumption that part of your position as an investigator involves understanding the feelings of others?
Objection, Your Honor. This is again a leading question.
I'll allow it with an expert witness on his expertise. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right. Thank you. May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. People's next.
Your Honor, the prosecution now calls Officer Max Bird to the stand.
Calling Officer Max Bird to the stand. Please state your first and last name and spell your last name.
Max Bird, B-I-R-D.
Please right hand. Do you promise the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
For the judge's convenience, testimony for this witness can be found on pages 31 to 33.
Thank you, Mr. Bailiff.
May I begin, Your Honor?
Please.
Good evening, Officer Bird. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Max Bird. I'm an officer with the Beacon County Sheriff's Station in Beacon County, California. I've been with the station for nearly a decade now. I do classify myself as a veteran of my station, and I do consider myself well attuned to the issues impacting my county, my community of Beacon Hills.
Now, could you please tell us about your training and experience as you are a veteran law enforcement officer?
I was trained in law enforcement at the police academy and have worked in this field for about a decade. so I'm well accustomed to the way things work. My duties include taking crime reports, investigating cases, interviewing witnesses, victims, suspects, as well as conducting follow-up. Also, as an officer, I push myself to follow strictly the evidence of a case rather than bias of any particular witness.
Now, officer, could you please tell this court how you became involved in the case?
My station received a call which reported a robbery and an assault at the Marshak residence, and I was the officer that reported to the scene.
Thank you. Now, could you please describe the scene of the crime to the court?
When I arrived at Marshak's residence, his front door was left wide open, and when I entered the home through the front door, I saw a window that had been popped open alongside Drew Marshak in a clear daze with a large wound on his forehead.
Now, officer, did you arrest anybody in this case?
Yes, Remi Montoya.
Now, could you please tell the court why you arrested Remi Montoya?
We received a tip as a result of a news story that aired the night before the arrest. This tip pointed us in the direction of Remi Montoya and gave us a physical description of Remi Montoya.
Could you please inform this court of where you arrested Remi Montoya?
I arrested Remi Montoya at the residence of Lee Croddy.
Now, could you please tell us what the attitude was of both Remi and Lee Croddy at the scene of the arrest?
When I arrived at Miss Croddy's residence, I found Remi Montoya acting
Objection, Your Honor. This was a compound question.
I'll rephrase. Withdrawn. Officer Bird, could you please tell us about the attitude of first Remi Montoya at the scene of the arrest?
When I arrived at the scene, Remi was acting very frantic and was screaming about government secrets.
Now, could you please describe the attitude of Lee Croddy at the scene?
Lee came outside and asked me questions such as, what did Remi do and what did Remi take?
Now, you mentioned the arrest took place at the Croddy residence. Was this your first interaction with Miss Croddy?
Yes, this was my first interaction with Lee Croddy.
And during this first interaction, was anything notable said by Miss Croddy in your car on the way to the station for questioning?
When I spoke to Lee in the car, she mentioned to me that she sent Remi to Drew Marshak's residence.
Now, and did you have any future interactions with Miss Croddy?
Yes, when I arrested Miss Croddy for her involvement in this case.
What initially led you to believe that Lee Croddy may be a suspect?
Well, Remi Montoya had mentioned to me that he was sent by Mr. Croddy, and after further questioning of Remi Montoya, I came to the conclusion that she was involved in this case.
And what was the evidence that allowed you to seek an official arrest warrant for Lee Croddy?
The evidence collected from a number of people we interviewed, including Zuri O'Neill, Erin Sullivan, Remi Montoya. These statements each portrayed Croddy as a prime instigator in this crime.
Thank you, officer. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Hello, officer.
Hello.
You spoke to Remi Montoya outside of Lee Croddy's residence, correct?
Correct.
And you described Remi as frantic while speaking to them, correct?
Correct.
Lee Croddy claimed to be housing Remi because he had seemed so frantic the day before, right?
Correct.
Also, Lee Croddy claimed to not know what Remi had done, right?
Correct.
While being arrested, Remi Montoya told you they were starting a revolution, correct?
Correct.
But Lee Croddy never mentioned anything about a revolution or anything of that sort to you, correct?
Correct.
Now, while being taken to the station, Lee denied representing any anarchist views, correct?
Correct.
Croddy also claimed that she was not close with Remi Montoya, right?
Correct.
Now, Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
I would like to direct the witnesses and the court's attention to Exhibit C, which can be found on page 50 of the updated case packet. Officer Bird, do you recognize this exhibit?
Counsel, if you have it there handy, you can just hold it up.
Yes, please.
I'm sorry, I don't have a very great copy of it. But
yeah, I get the gist.
What is this exhibit?
text messages between, as I could see, Lee Croddy and Remi Montoya.
Yeah. And is this a fair and accurate representation of this evidence that you collected?
Correct. Yes, it is.
Now, Officer Bird, in this document, Lee told Remi to get the documents, right?
Yes.
But Lee Croddy never instructed Remi to break into the house, correct?
Correct.
Nor in this document did Lee ever instruct Remi to take the documents by force, right?
Correct.
And in this document, Lee Croddy never once told Remi Montoya to punch Agent Drew Marshak in the face, right?
Correct.
Thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you. Will care to redirect?
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you very much. The witness is excused.
Your Honor, the prosecution now calls Dr. Kai Chavez to the scene.
All right.
Calling Dr. Kai Chavez to the stand. Please state your first and last name and spell your last name for the court.
Kai Chavez, Chavez.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
For the judge's convenience, testimony for this witness can be found on pages 34 to 35.
Thank you.
Your Honor, may I begin?
Please.
Good evening, Dr. Chavez. Could you please tell us about your background and occupation?
Sure. I received my undergraduate at South Hudson University for psychology. After that, I pursued my MD and completed my graduate studies along with 3 years of residency, and I have started my own psychology practice. In my practice, I treat and research patients with personality disorders. I also make sure they get their proper medications and treatment.
Doctor, have you ever testified in court as an expert witness before?
Yes, I've testified in 150 cases prior to this one, all in the similar subject matter.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the doctor is an expert in his field?
Any objection by the defense?
None, Your Honor.
All right, we'll note the expertise. Thank you.
Doctor, are you familiar with the term groupthink?
Yes, groupthink is when people participating in a group conform to the ideas of others for the purpose of fitting in. Some common traits between people who participate in groupthink is that they are often inflexible and do not want people to share opposing opinions to their own.
Please stop. Your time is finished.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor, but before we begin, the defense requests a time check for cross-examination.
Yes, the defense has approximately 104 seconds left for cross-examination.
Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Chavez.
Good evening.
Isn't it true that Mr. Montoya, thoroughly enjoyed Ms. Croddy's posts even before being added into a group chat?
I believe so.
So Mr. Montoya would not have needed to agree for the sake of agreeing about her support of the content in the group chat, correct?
Other than maybe to get her approval, yeah.
And groupthink can sometimes be seen in the form of agreeing for the sake of agreeing, correct?
Correct.
Dr. Chavez, I'm going to read lines 47 through 48 of Exhibit B on page 49, which was sent by Mr. Montoya. Most of us will be in Beacon Hills this weekend for the meet and greet. Marshak lives close to there. Mr. Montoya is the first person in this group chat to make an explicit connection between the location of the meet and greet and the location of Marshak's home. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And being the first to do something is a way of taking initiative, correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you very much. This witness is excused. I believe that concludes the people's presentation of evidence, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. People having rested, defense, would you care to present an affirmative case and call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Lee Croddy to the stand.
Calling Lee Croddy to the stand. Please state your first and last name and spell your last name for the court.
Lee Croddy, Croddy.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
For the judge's convenience, testimony for this witness can be found on pages 36 through 40.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ms. Croddy.
Good evening.
Could you please tell the court a little bit about yourself?
Of course. So, hi everyone. My name is Croddy. I'm 35 years old, and I used to be a freelance journalist, but that was before I started my own YouTube channel called The Right Choice of News.
And what is your channel about?
Well, my channel and my life has been dedicated to discovering and sharing the truth. Often, I'll share evidence with my followers that expose a government cover-up because I think people deserve to know.
Could you please tell me a little bit more about your following?
Following isn't the right word. I like to think of them as my internet family. You know, being a part of this movement together, we've really grown into a strong community. And not to mention, without them, I don't have a job. So I owe everything to my fans.
Now, I'd like to ask you about just one fan in particular. What is your relationship like with Remi Montoya?
It's not much different than any other relationship I try to have with my followers. We've met a few times face to face, but outside the online group chats or the YouTube channel, I really don't know them.
You mentioned group chats. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. My genius agent came up with the idea to start group chats on Twitter to increase publicity, and I must say it was a huge success. Not only did my following increase, but it falls right in line with my goal, which is to increase discussion about these controversial topics.
What did you talk about within these chats?
Often, I would share sneak peeks of my upcoming videos, much of which included unedited content. And the group chats really just allowed me to interact with my audience directly and gauge where they were at, whether they liked the content or had any suggestions.
What of any particular interest happened in the month of February?
Well, around February 9th, I received an anonymous envelope in my mailbox that included documents written by Marshak. These files proved the existence of extraterrestrial life, and I knew this was going to be huge.
What did you host on February 14th?
On February 14th, I hosted a meet and greet event at a local cafe with all my fans. Of course, this was before social distancing was a thing.
How did you prepare for your meet and greet?
Well, I immediately sent a message to one of my group chats right away. I was so excited. I also asked one of my fans, Remi, to go see if he could get the documents from Marshak before the event.
What was your intention behind asking Remi this?
Look, to be clear, I only intended for Remi to go to the door, knock, talk to Marshak, maybe persuade them to hand over the documents. I never knew Remi would go as far as he did.
At that meet and greet, how much interaction did you have with Remi?
Not much. Remi did approach me, but they were talking so fast, I couldn't make out a word they were saying. They looked really upset, and I was really worried about them. Of course, at the time, I didn't know over what.
And after the event, what did you and Remi discuss?
Even by the end of the event, we didn't. Remi was still so worked up. I was beginning to get worried about their mental state, so I offered them a ride and asked them if they wanted to stay over.
What happened after your discussion with Remi?
Well, like I said, I was so worried about them that I offered them a ride back to my place.
What, if anything, happened during the ride back to your house?
I noticed Remi kick something under his seat. I couldn't really see, it was dark. When I asked Remi about it, he snapped at me, so I stopped asking questions. They looked exhausted, and I just offered them a place to rest.
What happened the next morning?
Well, the next morning, I was the one who was exhausted. I mean, this girl needs her beauty sleep. So when I noticed Remi pacing outside, I didn't think much of it. I went back to bed, and you can imagine my surprise when I heard shouts and saw Remi getting arrested in my front yard.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I begin?
Please.
Let's get right into it, Mrs. Croddy. Is it correct that you have interaction via group chats with your engaged fans?
Yes.
Is it correct that on February 12th, you sent documents to these group chats?
It was included in one of the unedited videos.
Yes or no question, please.
It was included accidentally.
A yes or no answer, please.
In a video, yes.
Yep. Thank you. Is it correct that Marshak's address was in these documents?
Accidentally, yes. But in the full video,
so yes. Thank you.
The full videos were blurred.
I would like you to refer to Exhibit B, Mrs. Croddy, Miss Croddy, apologies. Do you know what this is?
Yes, this is a Twitter group chat.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of your Twitter group chats?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness has correctly identified the exhibit.
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
Thank you. The record may so. Go ahead.
Let me direct you to a quote around line 21. Is it correct that you said, I'll march right up to him being Drew Marshak, and demand the information? Is this correct?
Yes,
Your Honor,
Yeah,
compound
okay.
question.
Actually, no.
On line 21, is it correct that you said, I'll march right up to him and demand the information?
I said I will march up to Marshak, yes.
Thank you. Let me also direct you to lines 47 through 52, where in response to one of your fans saying that Marshak lived near the meet and greet, you said, and I quote, I guess this couldn't have come at a better time. Is this correct?
That's in reference to the fact that these documents surfaced. So
Is this correct?
Yes.
Thank you. You also said at line 55 how your family will mobilize after this Thursday. Is this correct?
I said we're going to want to mobilize.
Is this correct?
We're going to want to mobilize, yes.
Mrs. Croddy, you said so far how you've only intended for Remi to ask for the documents. Is this correct?
Yes.
I'd like to direct you to Exhibit C, Mrs. Croddy. Do you know what this is?
Yes, this is the text conversation between myself and Remi Montoya.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of your text conversations with Remi Montoya?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness has correctly identified the exhibit.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
Thank you. The record may reflect.
Mrs. Croddy, let me direct you, Miss Croddy, let me direct you to lines 29 through 32, where you tell Remi Montoya in all caps that he needs to get into that house tomorrow, and that you really, really need them, and that Remi needs to get into that house tomorrow. Is all of this correct?
Those are not my
Is
words.
this
No, you're not explaining my words properly.
would you like to read them?
I mean, I can. I just
Can you read them, please?
Yes, so I just told Remi we need those
No,
documents.
please, direct quote, please.
Direct quote.
Please read it line for line.
We need those documents, Remi. You really need to get into that house tomorrow.
Thank you. Is it correct that not once in these texts you mentioned Remi Montoya strictly asking for the documents?
I never told them to
Is this correct?
or assault the officer. either.
Miss Montoya, it was a yes or no question.
Yes, I never said.
Okay, moving on. Is it correct that you also saw Remi Montoya at your meet and greet?
As I've testified, yes.
Is it correct that afterwards you picked up Remi Montoya and drove him back to your house?
I offered Remi a ride. Yes.
But you drove him back to your home?
Yes, it was clear that they were still upset by the end.
Okay, thank you. Let me refer to Exhibit A, Miss Croddy. Do you know what this is?
Yes, this is Drew Marshak's briefcase.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of the briefcase that you saw when Remi Montoya brought it to your home?
I suppose, as I said, it was very
Thank
dark.
you. Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness has correctly identified the exhibit.
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
The record may reflect the identification of the exhibit.
Last question, Ms. Croddy. Is it correct that you admitted to Officer Byrd that you told Remi Montoya to go and get the documents from Mr. Marshak?
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Objections overruled.
I told the officer that I told Remi to get the documents, but
The quote, Ms. Montoya, the quote is, go and get the documents from Mr. Marshak. Is this correct?
that I told the officer.
Yes. When you were speaking to Officer Max Byrd, you said, go and get the documents from Mr. Marshak. Is this correct?
Yes, when I was telling officer what I
But
had.
thank you. No further questions.
Any redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor. Ms. Croddy, it seemed like you had a little bit more you wanted to speak about this. How did the information of the address get transferred?
So in the unedited video clip that I sent to the group chat, I held up the documents only to show, hey, I found proof. The personal information of Drew Marshak was accidentally included. In the full video that I later released, that information was completely blurred.
Thank you. No further questions. At this time, may this witness please be excused?
The witness is excused. Thank you. Defense next.
The defense calls Mr. Erin Sullivan to the stand.
Calling Mr. Erin Sullivan to the stand. Please state your first and last name and spell your last name for the court.
Erin Sullivan, Sullivan.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
For the judge's convenience, testimony for this witness can be found on pages 46 to 47.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Sullivan.
Good evening, Mr. Chan.
Could you tell the court a little bit about yourself?
I'm Lee Croddy's agent, and I've worked with her for the past 3 years. As Lee's agent, my plate is pretty full. I set up events, schedule appearances, help with Lee's social media, and work with the legal and business sides of Lee's brand. I know, I do a lot.
You said you help with Lee's social media. Can you explain a particular instance of this?
Yeah, last year, Lee was experiencing a plateau in her views and followers, so I worked to get back her social media clout. With Lee's publicist, I designed an outreach program to create private group chats on Twitter.
How did this effort turn out?
Well, it was low-key very successful. The group chats were a way for big fans to support Lee personally. Then the fans would basically do our work for us and tell all their friends about the channel. This caused a huge boost in engagement with Lee's YouTube videos and social media. Lee's fan base was really turning up. YouTube videos were now getting millions of views, and her Twitter hit 1 million followers.
Mr. Sullivan, why is this online success important to Lee?
You see, as her engagement increases, she receives more revenue through her brand deals. And as a content creator, she wouldn't want her actions to jeopardize her brand and career.
I see. Let's now talk about the meet and greet event on February 15th. What, if anything, did you see of note at this event?
Well, I saw Remi Montoya, a fan who was in one of the Twitter group chats.
What did you see Miss Montoya do?
I saw Remi approach Lee, who sort of embraced him. This was kind of odd, so I thought they may have known each other or something, but I don't know for sure. Then again, I did notice that Remi seemed very nervous. In fact, his mood alone brought down the vibe of the whole event.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Objection overruled.
Mr. Sullivan, could you briefly expand a bit more on Remi's mood?
Yeah, Remi was just acting super weird. He stood in the corner watching everyone and then started pacing anxiously around the cafe.
And how did Lee react to all this?
Well, Lee told me that she believed Remi was having some kind of an episode and she wanted me to keep an eye on him. When the event wrapped up, she invited Remi to stay at her place for the night.
Mr. Sullivan, having worked with Lee for 3 years, how did this appear to you?
Well, it wasn't out of the ordinary at all. Several times during similar events, I've seen Lee go above and beyond for her fans, whether they be longtime viewers or new fans of the channel. It looked to me like Lee was just trying to help Remi calm down from his panic.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Sullivan.
Good afternoon.
As Lee's agent, you run most of his behind-the-scenes work, correct?
Yeah,
You helped expand Lee's brand, right?
I did.
You said towards the end of 2017 and early 2018 that Lee Croddy's follower growth had plateaued. Is that correct?
That's correct.
However, you found ways like meet and greets and group chats to expand Lee's following. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But sensational video content would help maintain that growth, correct?
That's correct.
And isn't it true that a video exposing government documents would not jeopardize Lee's brand, but instead accelerate it?
That's correct.
To secure Lee's rise in fame as a controversial personality, you ensure Lee does not get into any legal trouble, correct?
Yeah, we always want to stay out of legal issues.
Yeah, and you have a legal team for Lee, right?
We do.
You put disclaimers on every single video for Lee to warn the viewer and make sure that nothing could possibly end up with Lee Croddy in court, correct?
Yeah, like I said, we want to stay away from legal issues.
Were you aware that Croddy had Mr. Marshak's address leaked to the group chat?
I'm not aware of that.
Did Lee ever consult you or the legal team in regards to the contents of the WhatsApp text conversation telling Remi to go get the documents?
No, I generally stay out of the group chat information.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Any redirect?
None, Your Honor. May this witness be excused.
The witness may be excused. Thank you both. Defense.
Your Honor, at this moment, may the prosecution request a time check for cross-examination?
Yes, sorry. The prosecution has 3:44, 3 minutes and 44 seconds left for cross-examination.
Thank you.
And while we're at it, may the defense also request a time check for direct exam?
Certainly.
Yes, of course. Just give me 1 minute.
You got it.
Yes, for direct, the defense has 6 minutes and 29 seconds left.
Thank you.
At this time, the defense would like to call Zuri O'Neill to the stand.
Calling Zuri O'Neill to the stand. Please state your first and last name and spell your last name for the court.
I'm Zuri O'Neill. O-N-E-I-L-L.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
For the judge's convenience, testimony for this witness can be found on pages 41 to 43.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. O'Neill.
Good evening.
Could you introduce yourself to the court?
Sure. I'm Zuri O'Neill. I'm 18 years old. I'm a political enthusiast, I'm a political activist, a firearm enthusiast, and I work as an intern at Atlantis News Nightly.
And what do you do in your free time?
Oh, in my free time, like I said, I'm a political activist, so I seek out the truth and try to tell the truth myself. And I also watch an unhealthy amount of YouTube, to be honest, and that's how I got involved with Lee Croddy.
How is it that you know Lee Croddy?
So for my work, I was actually assigned a piece on Lee Croddy's YouTube channel, and I noticed that her ideas were really cool, so I started following them in my free time.
In what ways were you able to be a fan of Lee?
Well, I was able to watch her YouTube videos, and I was later invited to a private group chat with herself and some of her closest followers, so I felt really included.
What were these group chats used for?
Oh yeah, they were just used as a means of communication through Lee to her followers, to her closest followers, yeah. And she would often send out sneak peeks of videos before they were released.
Were there any recurring topics that were brought up in the group chat?
Oh yeah, for sure. The whole point of them was to talk about the government and the things that were on our mind. And for me, at least, it was a way to vent about the government issues that were on my mind.
And how do you interpret Lee's online words?
I believe that Lee is a straight shooter, and I believe that her words carry no subtext or hidden meaning in private and public.
What other ways have you been able to interact with Lee besides online?
Oh, well, I was actually fortunate enough to attend a meet and greet on February 15th in a local cafe.
Who, if anyone else, were you able to recognize there?
I noticed that Remi Montoya was there. They were a member of the group chat.
How did Remi appear during the event?
Remi was appearing really unusual. It was almost if I had said something to upset her or something. Him. But yeah, it was really weird.
What happened to Remi after the event?
I left before them, but I later heard that they both got arrested. I was so shocked to hear it.
Now, Mr. O'Neill, to your knowledge, what criminal activities have been committed, excluding Remi Montoya's, because of Lee Croddy's content?
To my knowledge, no one has ever committed a crime because of Lee's content. I believe that Lee's purpose is similar to mine, and that's to seek and tell the truth and inform people of what the government is doing, so it has to stay truthful.
Thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross. I think you might be muted.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, may I begin?
Please.
Mr. O'Neill, is it correct you're an active follower of Lee Croddy?
Yes, I'd say so.
Is it fair to say you trust Lee's judgment?
Yeah, I trust her.
Are you in any group chats with Miss Croddy, yes or no?
Yes.
If I could please have you refer to People's Exhibit B, the Twitter group chat.
Sure.
Do you know what it is?
Yes, I know this exhibit.
How do you know what it is?
I'm a member of the group chat.
And Your Honor, may I please have Exhibit B entered into evidence and also have the record reflect that the witness correctly identified it?
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. The exhibit is received and the witness identified it.
Mr. O'Neill, please refer to lines 36 to 38 as well as line 42.
Okay. Would you like me to read them?
No, thank you. Is it correct that in your response to Lee saying, if Marshak won't answer us, we will take what is ours, and you responded with, fight the good fight?
Yeah, I believe the government should be truthful and
Thank you.
reveal-
No further questions.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. At this time, may this witness be excused.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to each of you. Defense next.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Dr. Jess Biart to the stand.
Calling Dr. Jess Biart to the stands. Please state your first and last name and spell your last name for the court.
Jess Beart, Beaart.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
Of course.
For the judge's convenience, testimony for this witness can be found on pages 44 to 45.
When you're ready.
Good evening, Dr. Biart.
Good evening.
Let's just start off with your qualifications. Could you tell us about your education?
Of course. I graduated from Peterson University in 2007 with a bachelor's in sociology and marketing and a minor in psychology. Then I obtained my PhD in sociology, focusing on activism and social movements.
What is your current occupation?
I currently have the great fortune of being an associate professor of sociology at Beechwood University. I have also continued my research on social movements, publishing articles in various publications such as the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, if you're familiar.
How did you start working on this case?
I was called in to analyze aspects of the case, in particular Croddy's social media presence.
Can you describe your research on the roles of social media activist leaders?
I've found that many recent activist leaders are more similar to figureheads to a social movement than they are managers. They want to tap into the power of their fans to start a movement that acts independently of the leader, instead of providing specific objectives. For example, in the school strike for climate movement for environmental activism, which was started by Greta Thunberg, participants generally mobilized not because of their leader's directions, but because of their shared dedication to the cause.
Let's turn our attention now to Lee Croddy. What type of leader would Croddy be?
Croddy is the same type of leader as Greta Thunberg, a figurehead to a movement that inspires supporters but ultimately does not control them. It would simply be inaccurate to characterize Croddy as a puppet master plotting behind the scenes. Instead, she simply connects with and encourages her fans.
Having analyzed both Croddy and Montoya's communications, what type of fan do you think Remi Montoya is?
Montoya appears to be an activist who acts independently of the movement's leader. In fact, Montoya's frequent participation in social media is typical of passionate fans who, in addition to vehemently supporting their leaders, sometimes create movements themselves. In this case, Croddy texted Montoya to see if they could acquire the documents, and ultimately it was Montoya, not Croddy, who later decided to rob the house.
In your professional opinion, what role did Croddy's leadership play in Montoya's actions?
My professional conclusion is that Croddy's leadership had very little impact on Montoya's actions. Croddy is a leader who wants to be a figurehead for her movement to better promote it. It seems that Montoya should have been able to separate his adoration of Croddy from the reality of his actions. Ultimately, Montoya acted independently of Croddy's influence when he broke into that house.
Thank you, Dr. Biart. No further questions.
Thank you. Cross?
Yes, Your Honor, but before the time starts, may the prosecution request a time check on how much time I have left for cross-examination?
Certainly.
Yes, of course. The prosecution has 2 minutes and 38 seconds left in their cross-examination.
Thank you. May I now begin?
Please.
Doctor, have you ever testified as an expert before in court?
No, mainly I spend time conducting
Thank you.
research.
A yes or no would have been sufficient. You've extensively studied Greta Thunberg's movement, is that correct? Yes or no?
Amongst others, yes.
Now, did Greta Thunberg commit any violent crimes as a result of her activism?
No.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Overruled.
Do you need me to repeat the question?
Yes, that would be great.
Did Greta Thunberg commit any violent crimes as a result of her activism?
To my knowledge, she is not.
Is it fair to say you are quite familiar with Lee Croddy's channel and fan base?
From the research I've conducted for this case, yes.
Isn't it true that Lee and one of his followers were arrested on charges of violent crimes in their activism?
Yes, I suppose.
Yes or no? Thank you. Is it correct that in your witness statement, you said that Lee's fans wanted to start a movement independent of her, excuse me?
Yes, that's what I stated.
Is it correct? I'm sorry. Is it correct that Lee is the founder of her movement?
Yes, as I said, she is similar to.
Thank you. Is it fair to say that Lee is the instigator in the group chats that she created?
I don't know if I would use that particular word.
Would you say that Lee is giving the content, leading the charge?
Yes, she's providing the information.
Thank you. Would it be fair to say that Lee's followers take action based on what she says because of the fact that Lee is at the top, giving out the information?
I wouldn't want to speculate to their motivations, but I would disagree that Lee is the sole cause of their actions.
But could you attribute part of it?
Yes, of course, with the information she provides.
Thank you. Is it fair to say that Remi was acting in compliance with something that Lee told him to do?
Yes, if you.
Yes or no. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Redirect.
None, Your Honor. At this time, may this witness please be excused?
The witness may be excused. Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and move to closing arguments then. And I look forward to having you synthesize both sides of the evidence presented for my consideration. And we'll start with the prosecution.
Thank you, Your Honor. Before I begin, may I ask for a time check?
Yes, the prosecution has 5 minutes and 28 seconds left for their closing argument.
Thank you. May I begin, Your Honor? Please. As shown in this trial, Lee Croddy is a businesswoman with a news company focused on one thing: growth. It is clear from the power she wields on her social media accounts and her internet family that Lee Croddy is more than just a news creator. Lee Croddy is an influencer. But Lee Croddy's business model follows on one thing: content. And so when Lee Croddy received a tip from an anonymous source that a government official houses classified information on aliens, she immediately jumped to act upon it. Lee Croddy needed content at any cost. So Lee's next action was to announce a scheme to hype her audience that she herself would go to Mr. Marshak's house and take what is ours. That is a promise Lee will not break to her fans. But if Lee gets caught, it would jeopardize the entire brand that she built. It would jeopardize her whole news organization. So Lee created a plan that she didn't bother to show her lawyers, nor did she bother to show her agent, Erin Sullivan. Lee's plan was to pressure one of her most ardent followers to go commit burglary and take those documents for her. Then Lee can show off the classified documents on YouTube and profit off of it. So on February 14th, 2020, Lee Croddy put her plan into action. She personally messaged Remi Montoya, approached her first. Remi Montoya did not come up with this plan on his own, and told Remi Montoya that we really need those documents, and guilt tripped them, and said on multiple occasions that we need those documents, Remi. We need them. And finally concluded with, get into that house tomorrow. After the crime, Lee can take Remi to her house through the back entrance and shelter Remi in her personal shelter, in her personal underground bunker, in order to avoid getting caught. That plan failed when Remi Montoya was arrested, charged with burglary, along with the priceless information he held. Your Honor, the defendant cannot escape the consequences of her actions. As a result, the people have charged Lee Croddy with the violation of California Penal Code Section 31 and 32. As the people, we have the burden of proof to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Lee Croddy not only knew of Remi's intentions to commit burglary, but also aided, abetted, and encouraged Remi Montoya to do so in accordance with Calcrum 401. And the people are confident that we have met that burden. The evidence in this case and trial shows us why. First, we learned from Erin Sullivan that Lee Croddy benefits handsomely from sensational content like classified information. So the defendant had a clear motive to lay her hands on those documents. Secondly, Lee Croddy gave Remi Montoya the tools he needed to commit burglary, Mr. Marshak's address. We heard today from Remi Montoya that Lee Croddy leaked the address, Drew Marshak's address, to the group chat that Remi Montoya is in, and repeatedly made a call to action to go to Drew Marshak's house and take what is ours. Now, Your Honor, the defense can argue that Lee never explicitly said to go rob or steal the information. But as shown in the context of the situation and the defendant's consistent insisting that Remi get the documents, it is very clearly implied. Drew Marshak today told us on the stand that he wouldn't just give classified information to anyone who asks for it. Drew Marshak's occupation is so secretive he wouldn't even admit what he does on this trial. It is clear and obvious that in order to get classified information from a government official, one would have to steal it. Lastly, our main evidence, Exhibit B, shows this story clearly. In it, we learned that Lee approached Remi and asked for a favor from him, which is to get to that house tomorrow. Lee also compelled and guilt-tripped Remi on multiple occasions to get those documents by any means necessary. And as a result, Your Honor, the people request that you find Lee Croddy guilty for aiding and abetting burglary. Lastly, Your Honor, the people must also prove without a reasonable doubt that the defendant acted as an accessory after the fact of burglary in accordance with Calcrum 440, and we are confident we have met that proof. First, Exhibit A, shown here, shows Drew Marshak's briefcase that Lee Croddy admitted on trial today that she saw clearly in the backseat of her car. Secondly, it is interesting that Lee Croddy would take any fan home to her house using her car. It is clear that Lee Croddy acted as an accessory after the fact to burglary for Remi Montoya by taking him home to her house using her car from the back entrance of the house.
Your time is up.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. I'd like to hear the defense closing, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening. Again, my name is Albert Jen, defense attorney for my client, Lee Croddy. In the case that the prosecution has presented to you today, there was, and there will be insufficient proof to convict. My counsel and I ask for a verdict of not guilty. As explained in opening statements, in computer science, conditional statements are a cornerstone of any programming language. The formula rooted in formal logic is rather simple. If something is true, then do this. If that condition turns out to be false, the following action never should be executed. There are two conditional statements, just two if-then statements that produce immense amounts of reasonable doubt that render the only fair verdict of January 26th, 2021, and that is not guilty. To understand these two conditional statements, I will firstly outline and review the most crucial, the most significant evidence in the case. After, I will explain the opposing counsel's every failure to adequately address significant elements of the trial. In today's trial, Lee Croddy and Erin Sullivan of the defense, and even Drew Marshak and Officer Max Bird of the prosecution, affirm the truth and the existence of the very first conditional statement's condition, or otherwise known as the if statement. The two defense witnesses and two prosecution witnesses have thoroughly detailed the visible panic, the state of anxiety, and the overwhelming emotions that plagued Remi at that meet and greet. The if statement or condition has been affirmed and validated by both sides of today's case. When sworn in and put on the stand, Lee Croddy and Erin Sullivan explained the then statement, the logical reaction to an anxious, nervous, and overwhelmed fan. Lee Croddy simply took Remi Montoya under her wing, given the situational conditions. Now, let's connect this to a specific and applicable legal element in today's case. Calcrim 400 and 401 declare that in order to prove that the defendant is guilty of a crime, the people must prove that Lee Croddy knew that Remi Montoya intended to commit the crime. Additionally, the people must prove that Lee Croddy knew her actions would in fact aid, facilitate, and instigate Remi's commission of that crime. The valid if-then statement is simply miles away from this hefty burden the prosecution shoulders, because if your fan is anxious, if your fan is nervous, and if your fan is overwhelmed, then providing a helping hand is common courtesy. Conversely, let's examine the invalid and illogical conditional statement of today's trial. On cross-examination, after admitting to over-exaggerating his own witness statement, Remi Montoya of the prosecution himself detailed the if statement of their fallacious logic. Remi Montoya affirmed and read Lee Croddy's message out loud in today's court. Thank you. Good luck tomorrow. Do not do anything I would not do. Beyond this explicit guidance, which firmly directed Montoya to not do anything criminal, to not do anything illegal, or anything Lee Croddy would not do, Remi Montoya admits that that cautious warning was never accompanied by a text that said to steal the documents. And like a cherry on top, Remi Montoya also admits that Croddy never said to break into the house. Calcrim 401 shows that in order for the prosecution to prove guilt, Lee Croddy must have aided or abetted the perpetrator in committing the crime with both clear and explicit intention. If Lee Croddy told the perpetrator to not do anything she would not do, if Lee Croddy never said to steal the documents, if Lee Croddy never said to break into the house, then Montoya's decision to commit 2 felonies was a gross violation of simple logic, a flagrant mistake in invalid reasoning. Thus, Lee Croddy had zero clear and explicit intention, or rather any intention at all, to aid and abet. This second conditional statement's logical break is another major contribution to the mounds of reasonable doubt produced by today's trial. Your Honor, the prosecution had the burden to prove that my client is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Today, this high standard of meeting the conditions of Calcrim 400 and 401 was not met. Instead, today's trial leaves us with an abundance of ifs, right? If your fan is panicking, anxious, and overwhelmed, then the appropriate reaction is taking that fan under your wing. If there is explicit guidance and instruction to not perform a crime, then Lee Croddy is not held responsible for that performance of crime. The evidence pointing to Croddy's innocence is an overwhelming amount. And for that reason, and with that in mind, the defense respectfully requests that you render the only fair verdict of today, that is not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, counsel. People, would you care to rebut?
Yes, Your Honor. May I begin?
Please.
Your Honor, the defense brought an analogy today in reference to computer science and if-then statements. But computers can only read line by line. And this trial does not involve line by line reading. Instead, what computers fail to do, and what humans are naturally capable of, is looking at the context. Your Honor, the context of this situation doesn't involve just looking at a scared fan and wanting to take him home to help her out. Your Honor, the context of the situation shows that Lee Croddy messaged Remi Montoya the day before Remi stole the documents. The context shows that Lee Croddy incited this violence and this anger amongst his fans to go get those documents. And the defense fails to show the context that Lee Croddy didn't just meet Remi Montoya scared and helpless one day on a meet and greet.
Please stop. Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Defense, care to rebut?
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel spends a great deal of their closing statement connecting the theme of content for profit, but it's easy to manipulate words to speak for themselves when opposing counsel cherry picks from Exhibit C and B, failing to understand that there's a valuable absence from the text conversation that both their witness, Remi Montoya, and my client, Lee Croddy, affirm. Lee Croddy never said to steal the documents. Lee Croddy never said to break into the house. My client, Lee Croddy, even further displayed that when she asked Remi to get the documents from Drew Marshak, she had zero idea that Remi would take it upon herself to illegally break in. And beyond this, the facts of today's trial have been misinterpreted and falsely presented by opposing counsel. Remi stayed in the guest house, not the bunker, a clear distinguishment between the two settings. And beyond the fact that opposing counsel tries to champion the fact that that Lee Croddy saw the prop, Lee Croddy never admitted to that. And even if she was to, the sight of the prop does not align and does not equate to a recognition of crime. With that in mind, the prosecution...
Please stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have the 60-second rule that would apply now. So if both sides would like to confer with their coaches in 60 seconds or less, and then rejoin us and let us know if there's any irregularities.
Your Honor, the defense have no irregularities to present.
All right, thank you.
Your Honor, the prosecution also has no irregularities to present.
All right, thank you to both sides. All right, we've reached the conclusion of the trial, so everybody should be breathing a sigh of relief. Very, very well done. At this point, I'll announce the verdict and remind you that the verdict is independent of the scoring. I don't give you scores. Your scorers do that. I'm listening to the evidence and the arguments of counsel, and I do find that the people have met their burden of proof to show that Lee Croddy is guilty of both counts 1 and 2. There was particular pieces of objective evidence that, although the defense did an admirable job, the people met their burden. In particular, it's pretty difficult for the defense to overcome the text messages in Exhibit C in particular, where from the defendant's own mouth, he says, you really need to get into that house tomorrow. So I do find the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. All right, at this point, the teams have 2 minutes to decide which student from the opposing team should receive their MVP certificate. And if our time